Executive Realities. Page 31 of the e-book. The realities of the executive's situation both demand effectiveness from him and make effectiveness exceedingly difficult to achieve. Indeed, unless executives work at becoming effective, the realities of their situation will push them into futility. Take a quick look at the realities of a knowledge worker outside an organization to see the problem. Reality of a physician. A physician has by and large no problem of effectiveness. The patient who walks into his office brings with him everything to make the physician's knowledge effective. During the time he is with the patient, the doctor can, as a rule, devote himself to the patient. He can keep interruptions to a minimum. The contribution the physician is expected to make is clear. What is important, and what is not, is determined by whatever ails the patient. The patient's complaints establish the doctor's priorities. And the goal, the objective, is given, it is to restore the patient to health or at least to make him more comfortable. Physicians are not noted for their capacity to organize themselves and their work. But few of them have much trouble being effective. The executive in an organization is in an entirely different position. In his situation there are four major realities over which he has essentially no control. Every one of them is built into organization and into the executive's day and work. He has no choice but to cooperate with the inevitable, but every one of these realities exerts pressure toward non-results and non-performance. Executive Reality 1. The executive's time tends to belong to everybody else. If one attempted to define an executive operationally, that is, through his activities, one would have to define him as a captive of the organization. Everybody can move in on his time, and everybody does. There seems to be very little anyone executive can do about it. He cannot, as a rule, like the physician, stick his head out the door and say to the nurse, "I want to see anybody for the next half hour." Just at this moment, the executive's telephone rings, and he has to speak to the company's best customer or to a high official in the city administration or to his boss, and the next half hour is already gone. Executive Reality 2. Executives are forced to keep on operating unless they take positive action to change the reality in which they live and work. In the United States, the complaint is common that the company president or any other senior officer still continues to run marketing or the plant, even though he is now in charge of the whole business and should be giving his time to its direction. This is sometimes blamed on the fact that American executives graduate, as a rule, out of functional work and operations, and cannot slough off the habits of a lifetime when they get into general management. But exactly the same complaint can be heard in countries where the career ladder is quite different. In the Germanic countries, for instance, a common route into top management has been from a central secretariat, where one works all along as a generalist. Yet in German, Swedish, or Dutch companies' top management people are criticized just as much for operating as in the United States. Nor, when one looks at organizations, is this tendency confined to the top, it pervades the entire executive group. There must be a reason for this tendency to operate other than career ladders or even the general perversity of human nature. The fundamental problem is the reality around the executive. Unless he changes it by deliberate action, the flow of events will determine what he is concerned with and what he does. Depending on the flow of events is appropriate for the physician. The doctor who looks up when a patient comes in and says, "Why are you here today?" expects the patient to tell him what is relevant. When the patient says, "Doctor, I can't sleep. I haven't been able to go to sleep the last 3 weeks," he is telling the doctor what the priority area is. Even if the doctor decides, upon closer examination, that the sleeplessness is a fairly minor symptom of a much more fundamental condition, he will do something to help the patient to get a few good nights' rest. But events rarely tell the executive anything, let alone the real problem. For the doctor, the patient's complaint is central because it is central to the patient. The executive is concerned with a much more complex universe. What events are important and relevant, and what events are merely distractions the events themselves do not indicate. They are not even symptoms in the sense in which the patient has narrative is a clue for the physician. If the executive lets the flow of events determine what he does, what he works on, and what he takes seriously, he will fritter himself away operating. He may be an excellent man, but he is certain to waste his knowledge and ability and to throw away what little effectiveness he might have achieved. What the executive needs are criteria which enable him to work on the truly important, that is, on contributions and results, even though the criteria are not found in the flow of events. Executive Reality 3. The third reality pushing the executive toward an effectiveness is that he is within an organization. This means that he is effective only if and when other people make use of what he contributes. Organization is a means of multiplying the strength of an individual. It takes his knowledge and uses it as the resource, the motivation, and the vision of other knowledge workers. Knowledge workers are rarely in phase with each other, precisely because they are knowledge workers. Each has his own skill and his own concerns. One man may be interested in tax accounting or in bacteriology, or in training and developing tomorrow's key administrators in the city government. But the fellow next door is interested in the finer points of cost accounting, and hospital economics, or in the legalities of the city charter. Each has to be able to use what the other produces. Usually the people who are most important to the effectiveness of an executive are not people over whom he has direct control. They are people in other areas, people who in terms of organization, and are sideways or they are his superiors. Unless the executive can reach these people, can make his contribution effective for them and in their work, he has no effectiveness at all. Executive Reality 4. Finally, the executive is within an organization. Every executive, whether his organization is a business or a research laboratory, a government agency, a large university, or the Air Force, sees the inside the organization as close and immediate reality. He sees the outside only through thick and distorting lenses, if at all. What goes on outside is usually not even known firsthand. It is received through an organizational filter of reports, that is, in an already predigested and highly abstract form that imposes organizational criteria of relevance on the outside reality. But the organization is an abstraction. Mathematically, it would have to be represented as a point that is, as having neither size nor extension. Even the largest organization is unreal compared to the reality of the environment in which it exists. Specifically, there are no results within the organization. All the results are on the outside. The only business results, for instance, are produced by a customer who converts the costs and efforts of the business into revenues and profits through his willingness to exchange his purchasing power for the products or services of the business. The customer may make his decisions as a consumer on the basis of market considerations of supply and demand, or as a socialist government which regulates supply and demand on the basis of essentially non-economic value preferences. In either case the decision maker is outside rather than inside the business. Similarly, a hospital has results only in respect to the patient. But the patient is not a member of the hospital organization. For the patient, the hospital is real only while he stays there. His greatest desire is to go back to the non-hospital world as fast as possible. What happens inside any organization is effort and cost. To speak of profit centers in a business, as we are wont to do, is polite euphemism. There are only effort centers. The less an organization has to do to produce results, the better it does its job. That it takes 100,000 employees to produce the automobiles or the steel the market wants is essentially a gross engineering imperfection. The fewer people, the smaller, the less activity inside, the more nearly perfect is the organization in terms of its only reason for existence. the service to the environment. This outside, this environment which is the true reality, is well beyond effective control from the inside. At the most, results are determined, as for instance in warfare, where the outcome is the result of the actions and decisions of both armies. In a business, there can be attempts to mold the customer's preferences and values through promotion and advertising. Except in an extreme shortage situation such as a war economy, the customer still has the final word and the effective veto power, which explains why every communist economy has run into trouble as soon as it moved beyond extreme shortages and long before it reached the position of adequate market supply in which the customer, rather than the political authorities, makes the real and final decisions. But it is the inside of the organization that is most visible to the executive. It is the inside that has immediacy for him. Its relations and contacts, its problems and challenges, its cross-currents and gossip reach him and touch him at every point. Unless he makes special efforts to gain direct access to outside reality, he will become increasingly inside-focused. The higher up in the organization he goes, the more will his attention be drawn to problems and challenges of the inside rather than to events on the outside. An organization is different from the biological organism. An organization, a social artifact, is very different from the biological organism. Yet it stands under the law that governs the structure and size of animals and plants. The surface goes up with the square of the radius, but the mass grows with the cube. The larger the animal becomes, the more resources have to be devoted to the mass and to the internal tasks, to circulation and information, to the nervous system, and so on. Every part of an amoeba is in constant, direct contact with the environment. It therefore needs no special organs to perceive its environment or to hold it together. But the large and complex animals such as man needs a skeleton to hold it together. It needs all kinds of specialized organs for ingestion and digestion, for respiration and exhalation, for carrying oxygen to the tissues, for reproduction, and so on. Above all, a man needs a brain and a number of complex nervous systems. Most of the mass of the amoeba is directly concerned with survival and procreation. Most of the mass of the higher animal, its resources, its food, its energy supply, its tissues serve to overcome and offset the complexity of the structure and the isolation from the outside. An organization is not, like an animal, an end in itself, and successful by the mere act of perpetuating the species. An organization is an organ of society and fulfills itself by the contribution it makes to the outside environment. And yet the bigger and apparently more successful an organization gets to be, the more will inside events tend to engage the interests, the energies, and the abilities of the executive to the exclusion of his real tasks and his real effectiveness in the outside. An organization, a social artifact, is very different from the biological organism. Yet it stands under the law that governs the structure and size of animals and plants. The surface goes up with the square of the radius, but the mass grows with the cube. The larger the animal becomes, the more resources have to be devoted to the mass and to the internal tasks, to circulation and information, to the nervous system, and so on. Every part of an amoeba is in constant, direct contact with the environment. It therefore needs no special organs to perceive its environment or to hold it together. But the large and complex animals such as man needs a skeleton to hold it together. It needs all kinds of specialized organs for ingestion and digestion, for respiration and exhalation, for carrying oxygen to the tissues, for reproduction, and so on. Above all, a man needs a brain and a number of complex nervous systems. Most of the mass of the amoeba is directly concerned with survival and procreation. Most of the mass of the higher animal, its resources, its food, its energy supply, its tissues serve to overcome and offset the complexity of the structure and the isolation from the outside. An organization is not, like an animal. An organization is not, like an animal, an end in itself, and successful by the mere act of perpetuating the species. An organization is an organ of society and fulfills itself by the contribution it makes to the outside environment. And yet the bigger and apparently more successful an organization gets to be, the more will inside events tend to engage the interests, the energies, and the abilities of the executive to the exclusion of his real tasks and his real effectiveness in the outside. The advent of the computer. This danger is being aggravated today by the advent of the computer and of the new information technology. The computer, being a mechanical moron, can handle only quantifiable data. These it can handle with speed, accuracy, and precision. It will, therefore, grind out hitherto unobtainable quantified information in large volume. One can, however, by and large quantify only what goes on inside an organization: costs and production figures, patient statistics in the hospital, or training reports. The relevant outside events are rarely available in quantifiable form until it is much too late to do anything about them. This is not because our information gathering capacity in respect to the outside events lags behind the technical abilities of the computer. If this were the only thing to worry about, we would just have to increase statistical efforts, and the computer itself could greatly help us to overcome this mechanical limitation. The problem is rather that the important and relevant outside events are often qualitative and not capable of quantification. They are not yet facts. For a fact, after all, is an event which somebody has defined, has classified and, above all, has endowed with relevance. To be able to quantify, one has to have a concept first. One first has to abstract from the infinite welter of phenomena a specific aspect which one then can name and finally count. The thalidomide tragedy. The thalidomide tragedy which led to the birth of so many deformed babies is a case in point. By the time doctors on the European continent had enough statistics to realize that the number of deformed babies born was significantly larger than normal, so much larger that there had to be a specific and new cause, the damage had been done. In the United States, the damage was prevented because one public health physician perceived a qualitative change, a minor and by itself meaningless skin tingling caused by the drug, related it to a totally different event that had happened many years earlier, and sounded the alarm before thalidomide actually came into use. The 4-dead cell lesson. The 4-dead cell holds a similar lesson. All the quantitative figures that could possibly be obtained were gathered before the Edsel was launched. All of them pointed to its being the right car for the right market. The qualitative change, the shifting of American consumer buying of automobiles from income determined to taste determined market segmentation, no statistical study could possibly have shown. By the time this could be captured in numbers, it was too late. The Edsel had been brought out and had failed. The truly important events on the outside are not the trends. They are changes in the trends. These determine ultimately success or failure of an organization and its efforts. Such changes, however, have to be perceived. They cannot be counted, defined, or classified. The classifications still produce the expected figures as they did for Edsel. But the figures no longer correspond to actual behavior. The computer is just a marvelous machine. The computer is a logic machine, and that is its strength but also its limitation. The important events on the outside cannot be reported in the kind of form a computer, or any other logic system, could possibly handle. Man, however, while not particularly logical, is perceptive, and that is his strength. The danger is that executives will become contemptuous of information and stimulus that cannot be reduced to computer logic and computer language. Executives may become blind to everything that is perception, that is, event, rather than fact, that is, after the event. The tremendous amount of computer information may thus shut out access to reality. Eventually the computer, potentially by far the most useful management tool, should make executives aware of their insulation and free them for more time on the outside. In the short run, however, there is danger of acute computeritis. It is a serious affliction. The computer only makes visible a condition that existed before it. Executives of necessity live and work within an organization. Unless they make conscious efforts to perceive the outside, the inside may blind them to the true reality. These four realities the executive cannot change. They are necessary conditions of his existence. But he must therefore assume that he will be ineffectual unless he makes special efforts to learn to be effective. Page 40 of the e-book.